Hello, this is our fifth lecture in 412, essay writing for the 7th term, where we write arguments and sometimes we write narration, description or classification, but the focus is on writing arguments. We said that in order to be writers, we have to be readers as well. We need to read about the current issues because this is what we write about. I suggested newspapers from around the world that are published in English, like, for example, Al-Ahram Weekly from Egypt, or the New York Times from the USA, or the Times of London, or any newspaper we find available. And we can read hundreds of these newspapers on the internet using the site we mentioned before. Al-Ahram Weekly is available in Egypt and in the Arab world. And this is a very good newspaper because it makes a link between the culture of this area and the culture of the West. It writes about the area in English, and that's what we usually do. We need to write about ourselves in English. So this is a very good start for us to read about ourselves in English, and then we write about ourselves in English again. In this issue, here we say, we are talking about what we read. What did we read? What are the points we read in Al-Ahram Weekly? Al-Ahram Weekly, we have a supplement. The newspaper is issued with a supplement, a few pages inside the newspaper itself. The supplement will deal with cultural issues. We read the newspaper itself, we read the political, economic, and so on, and then we go on to the supplement, and today I'll just browse the supplement very quickly. The supplement of the issue of this week has defending Byzantium. So I'm reading Al-Ahram Weekly, and this is the supplement number 2. I'm just browsing and not reading. There is here a whole page written on St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, and they say it was built by Byzantine kings and lots of details. We can read something like that and many others, or at least we browse, we read the title, we see the pictures, read the caption under the picture, we see the small summary, maybe we read a paragraph or two. If we are interested, we read on. And then we turn the pages and we browse. Browsing means we look at the titles, the small summary, a paragraph here, a paragraph there, look at the picture, read the captions, we're browsing to see what's there. And then we pick one subject and read it in details. Here we have Plain Talk, an article by Mossad Eddin, and he's an intellectual that's important to us. He talks about the Western culture and the Arabic culture as well, and he makes this kind of link. We learn a lot about Europe and Britain in particular by reading this writer. Then I see Best of Times about the Cairo Film Festival. Read about what's going on in this festival, about the films, about critics and ideas of the sort. We see the pictures and the captions. We are exposing ourselves to a lot of English where we express ourselves. We have here Hard Times, an essay by Nihat Saleha about a play in the theater. Let's browse it, see something about it and go on. I turn the page, there's an article here on Kulthum, the Star of the Orient. Now, there are, of course, occasions that make writers write about a certain topic. So we read and see what's there. At least we see the title, a small summary, one paragraph, and then we go on. Then, When Looks Don't Count. This is about a TV episodes about the history of Egypt and how we can rewrite the history a number of times or see history from different angles. You see the songs of Kulthum, the history of Egypt on TV. We read about St. Catherine Monastery. We saw something about Europe, about the cinema, something about theater, the culture. Then we move on. New pyramids found at Saqqara. Excavations and discovering the past of Egypt again and again, and something about pyramids at Saqqara and what's new here. Then there are other things. I'm not, of course, covering everything. Here we have I'd like learning better. A whole page on education, and this writer is talking about the shortcomings of education and what we need to do about that. There is here something of interest to us. We write on education and we are interested in these aspects, let's see what the writer says. Read a paragraph here, a paragraph there. We might find it simple, so we can carry on. And another thing, really very interesting and of great benefit to us, read about education and new angles of vision concerning how we improve education in Egypt. Then another article on the same page, again on education, another look and what we can do. Children of primary education express themselves. Here a side issue. Next page, do it better, about cuisine. And here's something about a new Arabia cuisine, cuisine of the Arab world. Something about food and dishes. Then on the last page, we have an article written as an essay or an argument by Lubna Abdulaziz. She's a good writer. She writes in English. And here she talks about Russia. I see an essay like the ones we study. We study a lot of these essays and we discuss them. So here is one source. I read the essay in front of me. There's something like 2,000 words or so, and so many details. We look at it first, and the beginner will not know that this has only one line from beginning to end. A beginner may read something about World War II. I'm just taking something from the middle of the article, something about World War I, something about Georgia, something about Obama, something about Putin and Medvedev, and so on. Lots of details. But this writer knows what she's doing. She's a professional writer, so all these details are threaded in one thread. We have the first paragraph telling us in a very beautiful and elegant way that she is talking about the identity of Russia. And Russia is caught between two different identities. She talks about the imperialist Russia of the past and Russia today, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, trying to play this role again. Or Russia being an Eastern country and a Western country at the same time. There is a dilemma. Here is Putin's dilemma about this kind of identity. The identity of Russia, what is it? The title is, What Now Russia? Question mark. The first paragraph says there are many layers and layers of this identity, and Russia is asking itself, what's my identity? The last paragraph does something like this too. We need to read this one and others and others. Here we say, we are reading the newspapers of last 2 weeks or the last week, and there is point number 1, for example, talk about Russia. Point number 2, talk about education in Egypt and improvement and so on, etc. Points number 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, what are we doing? We are exposing ourselves to English. And what kind of English? Current English. In newspapers of import, the good ones, like Al-Ahram Weekly and many others. We are looking at these things in order to expose ourselves to a lot of English and ideas of the same manner, at the same time. We get the ideas and we get the English together. Now, we say there shouldn't be focus only on one political issue. Valid issues are also economic, intellectual, social, and artistic. Now, we say this because most people in the Arab world are highly politicized. They are very much interested in politics, and this is good, it's not bad. However, this means that when they read newspapers, they read the first pages about, for example, Iraq, what's happening there, about Palestine, about problems in the Middle East, the political issues, and sometimes a point or two concerning economics. But they forget to turn the pages and read inside about the economic subjects, about the intellectual subjects, about the social ones, the artistic ones. We saw artistic subjects when we read about the cinema festival, and we read about theater. We saw social ones when we talked about children in the street, for example, not in this issue, in an issue before that, street children, what shall we do about them? We read intellectual issues also when you talked about education. So all these things do matter. We need to expose ourselves to a variety of topics and English used expressing these topics. Then we move on to an argument. This is what we always do, and that's why we're reading, in order to be able to write arguments as one type of writing. Draw a diagram to lay out the manner of organizing an essay of argument on the following topic. The first thing we do is the layout. The layout, the diagram, how we divide our ideas on the page. We start with a tree diagram or an outline in order to talk about this coming topic. Has the Egyptian middle class disappeared? This is a question. It's a topic about the middle class in Egypt. The question needs an answer. Our answer will be an argument. For example, a writer would say the Egyptian middle class has disappeared. If we say yes to that, we are writing an argument saying that it has disappeared, but we have to say how and why. What are the causes behind that? Or what are the points that will prove that this thing has happened? This was an issue that's discussed in the newspapers in Egypt for a long time. Sometimes writers will take an interest in that and write one essay after another. For example, the Egyptian writer Ahmad al-Mu'ti Hijazi discussed the issue over months, writing one episode after another, one installment of his group of essays on this subject, and many other writers said or talked about the same thing. We take this idea, and we make a tree diagram. Now, here is a tree diagram, a very general one, that does not talk about the middle class itself, about a similar subject and this subject. The tree diagram here is we have a thesis at the top, and we have 4 points to be discussed under this thesis. For example, if I say that my thesis is that this middle class has disappeared, and I prove this by saying, look at the economic issue. And then I write details and details and details. I explain and I give examples. The economic side, this is the topic sentence, under which I mention the economic structure of the Egyptian society today, and they see the rich and the poor, and how the poor are so many, the rich are very few, and the middle class is really very thin, that we can exaggerate and say it has disappeared. So the economic side of this issue, proving that the Egyptian middle class has disappeared, as some writers would say, this is an argument, we can agree or disagree talking about this argument, but if I'm going to write about this argument saying that the Egyptian middle class has really disappeared, I can prove this by talking about 4 aspects of the issue. For example, if we look at the economic aspect and we see that the poor and how many they are, and the rich and how many they are, and how many people represent the middle class, people draw a diagram making a bell curve. The bell curve saying that the 2 extremes are very small. The very poor should be small in number, the very rich are small in number, but in the middle class, for example, should be more. But is this a reality economically? Let's talk about it socially. Socially, we say the middle class, we divide the society this way. We say there's the upper class and the lower class and the very large middle class. This middle class itself can be divided into upper middle class and middle class and lower middle class. If we look at the structure of society in Egypt, if we study the poor again, but not economically now, but socially, we discover there are so many. The lower class has the greatest number. The upper class has almost disappeared. The upper middle class is there, a very thin one, and the rest of the middle class is almost not there. This is a little bit technical, but just think of the idea. Now, what about the moral aspect of the issue? There is a moral aspect. Usually, sociologists would say that conservative morality will be found especially in the middle class. It's the middle class that's conservative and that upholds morality very well. The upper class don't really care very much about morality. The lower class cannot afford to be moral. If we have a society that upholds morality very well, this means this society has a large middle class. If we look at a society and we find that the values, the moral values and moral standards of the past have disappeared, and there's a lot of corruption, a lot of immorality in the society, we can say that this society does not have a strong middle class. The middle class that will hold these moral values very dear to their hearts is not there anymore. So if I look at the moral scene, I discover that the middle class is not there, is not really represented in the map of the Egyptian society. Now, we can talk about the intellectual aspect. Intellectual aspect again, similar to the moral one, and we try to explore this idea. I'm not going to talk about the details because this is not a class or a lecture on the ideas as it is on how we program these ideas, how we put them into a diagram, how we divide the ideas in our head. So we may have started with this idea that some writers claim that the middle class at a certain society has disappeared, but we don't just say that this claim. I can prove that this is right because if we look at the economic aspect, we find this and this and that, and then we move on. On the other hand, or better say, furthermore, there is a social aspect to the problem. Study the social structure of a society. We see the middle class had disappeared too. Now let's move on furthermore to the moral aspect of the problem. Morality of the middle class is the one that should be apparent and so on, but we don't see it anymore. Let's move on to the intellectual aspect. So I took the idea and divided it into a number of elements, and these elements or these aspects, the best word to say here, these 3 or 4 pieces of evidence are economic, social, moral, and intellectual. Now this will make a good essay. If I'm going to write an essay like that, I introduce this essay by talking about why I mention or why I make this kind of claim. Why being interested at all in the middle class? I may say that a society depends on this class more than any other. This is the class that keeps the traditions going. This is the class that makes the identity of a certain country. This class is disappearing. So I said first, there is a certain kind of importance to talk about this particular issue, how it is important for sociologists, for example, how intellectuals like Ahmad Mawad Hijazi is interested in this issue, how he kept talking about that for a long time. So this is an issue of import, an issue that we may talk about, and we may say that I see, this is an argument now, a point of view that this class has disappeared. I give my pieces of evidence in 4 paragraphs or 3, and then at the end I say again, in this manner, as we have seen, the middle class has disappeared, studying this from a number of levels. And then we make a commentary saying that we need to bring it back by making some kind of equal distribution of wealth in a society, by sticking more to morality, the traditional moralities that we held very dear in the past, by raising the level of the intellectual interests in our young people. If we have this kind of higher level of intellectual interest, we may bring the middle class back. I mean the form and the shape of the middle class. Of course, the first point will be the economic aspect that will bring this middle class back. Now, here the commentary is something about, again, the importance or some kind of a hint at a solution. We need to bring this idea back. Now, this was a point concerning an argument, and I said we'll look at the newspaper and write these arguments. We can take from the newspaper of this week the idea of the identity of Russia and make an argument saying that the identity of Egypt is like this or like that. I want students to think about it. Some other students will say the identity of Saudi Arabia, the identity of the Emirates, the identity of Kuwait, the identity of the USA today with Obama. Take the idea of identity of a country and see it from your point of view and prove that it is like this or like that. Now, I don't want to give more ideas because it's not only the ideas that we are interested in, but how we deal with them. I said we have here a diagram. We use this, we apply this to the middle class, now apply it to other things. Let's move now to a grammatical issue. Grammatical and stylistic issues. We write essays in grammatical English, and we try to make our style a little higher than what we used the last year and the year before and the year before. We pay attention to stylistic issues, or some of them. One stylistic issue is the participial phrase. Students learned before to write simple sentences, compound and complex. Now let's see these simple sentences that start with a participial. This is one stylistic device that we can use to enhance our style and to make our style more compact and more effective. Let's see the sentence, for example. Realizing that music will soothe the baby, the mother played a record of soft tunes. Starting with the capital R, ending with the S here, then a full stop. This is a simple sentence. This simple sentence was originally a complex one, made up of two clauses. The first part, which is underlined here, was originally a clause like this: as the mother realized that music will soothe the baby. This was the original one. The mother played a record of soft tunes. It's very clear for the reader that the word realizing here refers to the mother. This word realizing modifies the mother. So this is a modifier. But this kind of modifier is called here participial. This is a present participle, and we call the whole phrase participial phrase. We may not analyze it, we may not need to analyze this kind of sentence, but we need to write sentences similar to it in order to break the monotony of writing simple sentences all the time. Simple sentences without this kind of structure, the participial phrases. So when I say realizing that music will soothe the baby, we mean, of course, that the mother comes after the comma is the one who's doing that. Instead of writing two sentences, or a complex one, we write a simple one without repetition of as the mother realized. Another one, we have here a sentence starting with the past participle. Again, it's another participial. Exhausted and tired of life itself, the old elephant retreated into oblivion. We take this sentence and we try to focus on the structure of this sentence, and I want students to learn something. We are not learning words and their meanings. Sometimes students will focus on the meanings of words. For example, they see a word like exhausted, if they see it for the first time, or oblivion, and they are interested in looking these up in a dictionary. Then they discover after years and years of study that the words of English are so many. We have got hundreds of thousands of words in English. We may even say that English has something like 1 million words. Studying these words is completely useless if I say that it is the number of words that's important. What's important is studying the structure of the sentence as not the words. If I train myself to understand the structure, I can understand any sentence in English. I can learn only 2,000 words, the most basic 2,000 words of English, and I learn the grammar of English, and I learn about the world. I have knowledge of the world, what's going on. My knowledge of the world plus my knowledge of the grammar of English plus my knowledge of only 2,000 words, which is a very small number of the vocabulary of English, will make me able to understand anything in English. So what I'm doing here is talking about the structure of the sentence and not the meanings of words. So once again, we look at the structure of sentences and we say, today we are talking about participial phrases, which means some kind of a long sentence that's made up of two units. The first unit is the underlined one, and the second unit comes after that, after a comma. The first unit was originally a clause, like the mother realized. Then we decided to make the whole sentence very compact with fewer words. We cancelled as the mother, and instead of realized, we said realizing, because she's the one who does the action. It is the present participial. And this becomes very compact. And if this is a new sentence, I see it for the first time, I know that realizing here refers to the mother. I'm learning the structure, not the meanings of words. So if I cannot understand the sentence, I understand it this way. There's realizing and there's a comma. So it's the mother coming after the comma. That's the one who realized. If it is anybody else, the sentence will not be correct. When you come to exhausted, we have the same thing. Who is exhausted? It's the old elephant. Well, why is it ed instead of ing? The ing here is because it's the mother who does the realizing. She's the doer. That's why it is a present participle, and present participle will denote the doer, the agent. But here it's ed. It means that the elephant does not do anything. The elephant is exhausted. This is the past participle. And here, the elephant is not doing it. So we describe the elephant as exhausted. We need verb to be here to understand it. So we can say, as the elephant was exhausted. If I read it for the first time, and I see exhausted, and I say who or what is exhausted, I see the comma. And then after the comma, we have the old elephant. So this must be the subject. And this subject should be used here. Since this is ed, so this thing is done to the elephant. The elephant was exhausted. Now we come to tired. Tired is added to exhausted. They are parallel, exhausted and tired. The two of them are past participle, and two of them are used as adjectives. So the elephant was both tired and exhausted. Well, we can say that tired means exhausted, but is not, because it is tired of life, which means he was bored of life. We are trying to understand the structure of the two sentences again. The elephant was exhausted. The elephant was bored of life itself. So what did it do? Comma, we start the basic subject, the subject of the sentence. The elephant did what? Retreated into oblivion, went back where he was forgotten. If we think a little, we can understand the meaning of oblivion from the meaning of the whole sentence. If the elephant is tired of life, now he doesn't want to live anymore. The elephant is exhausted, is so tired. Now the elephant goes back to where it could be what? To where he's forgotten, to where he dies, and nobody sees the elephant anymore. So we can guess the meaning of oblivion, rightly or wrongly, or knowing a meaning which is approximate to the original meaning by saying oblivion means where he's forgotten or where he's dead, but again dead and forgotten. So we can guess the meaning of the word from the structure of the sentence. Now we go to another thing. We have lacking again, which means who's lacking? It's Randy. Without reading the rest of the sentence and using a dictionary to decipher the meaning of words, I see the ing and I see the comma, and I know here that this is a participial describing Randy. So it's Randy who lacks confidence. Randy did not do well in public speaking. If I explain this furthermore, I say Randy did not do well in public speaking because Randy again lacks confidence or lacked confidence. This is another one. Again, what we are doing is participials. We can say that this sentence was because Randy lacked confidence, so we cancel because and Randy, and we used lacking because he's the one who's doing it. Why is this sentence better than the one I mentioned now, the one that says because Randy lacked confidence? Because this is more compact. We use fewer words, we make the sentence more efficient. Smiling sweetly, now we have another one. The little girl asked for another piece of the cake. Now who's smiling? It's the little girl. Now what was the original sentence? It must be something like this. While the little girl was smiling sweetly, the little girl asked for another piece of cake. Now this is more compact, shorter, more effective, using the ing alone to start my participial phrase structure. Now a final one, we start with the ed. Instead of the present participle, we have the past participle, and we say, blinded by the sandstorm, we lost our way. Who is the one who is blinded? The people who are blinded here are we. So we know that because this is past participle, starting with the past participle or present participle, then we have a comma, then we have we. The same structure over and over again. Now, we need to read things like these. Whenever we read a structure in English and we find a participle like that, we know this is one way of writing a sentence in English. We studied before the simple, compound, and complex sentences. So we add this kind of simple sentence that was originally a complex one, that's more compact. Now we are enhancing our ability to write style. We write grammatical sentences, and we use some stylistic devices like these to make our writing better. Let's see another stylistic device. Appositives. An appositive is a noun that renames another noun in a sentence. Let's see an example and go back to the general explanation. The manager, a thin, laconic Frenchman, came to meet her. This is a simple sentence that should be read like this. The manager came to meet her. So the manager's subject, came is the verb. We should never have anything between subject and verb. But if we have to add something like that, we can use a comma before and a comma after. The comma before and the comma after will say that this structure is parenthetical. Parenthetical means we can omit it. So we can read the sentence without the part that's highlighted, and we say, the manager came to meet her. Because I put this part, I inserted it between the subject and the verb, in order to describe the manager again, without any structure of description, without who is or who was. I simply repeat a nominal. The manager and the Frenchman are two nouns. So I write a noun and repeat the noun again. This second noun is described with thin and laconic. Again, this is a stylistic device that we call appositives. So once more, what are appositives? They are when a noun that renames another noun in the sentence. We use a noun to rename the other one. I could have said the manager, John, came to meet her, and John will be written between one comma here and one comma there. The manager is the name of a person or the job of a person, and John is the person, so we make a repetition. The repetition is to give more information. Now, this very simple sentence becomes a little longer and gives more information without adding lots of structures. This is again really very compact, and this makes our style richer. We used the appositives before we used the kind of participials. We said past participial and present participial, and here now we are using just nominals or nouns, repeating the same noun again. We repeated the subject. Can we repeat the object? We'll do this later, but let's see another subject. A neighbor, a woman, complained to the mayor, Judge Stevens. The sentence should read, a neighbor, then complained, then we say to judge or to the mayor. Judge Stevens comes after the comma, and the woman has a comma before it and a comma after it. So we say here a woman is a repetition of a neighbor. This neighbor is a woman. And instead of using a lot of structures like a neighbor who is a woman, this will be very redundant, unnecessary, because we understand. So we can simply use the noun and the noun again, but there has to be a comma before and a comma after to show that this is outside the structure of the sentence. A neighbor is the subject, complaint is the verb. A woman is simply a repetition. That's why these two commas are mandatory. They have to be used. And we call a woman here, it's a phrase in opposition to this first phrase. Again, it makes the style more compact, and we say a lot of information without adding lots of words, and we make the style or the sentences go faster. Now, the last word is mayor. We can do the same thing with mayor, repeating Judge Stevens. The mayor is Judge Stevens. So we have two phrases in opposition. A woman is a phrase in opposition, and Judge Stevens is another phrase in opposition to describe mayor, and woman describes neighbor. Now we can also say, there they were in the flesh, the Rolling Stones, the ultimate personification of all our notions and fantasies and hopes for rock and roll. We look at there, and then they were in the flesh, the Rolling Stones, etc. It looks like a very complicated structure for a beginner reading lots of words like that, making a simple sentence. But we understand that there are nouns in opposition. These nouns in opposition allowed the writer to write this very long sentence, adding lots and lots of information in a very compound way without making grammatical mistakes. Beginners will be tempted to write so many words like that without a structure. And I would not advise beginners to write sentences like these at the beginning. Of course, they do this kind of exercise later on, after they write hundreds and hundreds of simple essays using simple English. A beginner trying to write complicated sentences like these, not very complicated, but for a beginner it looks like that, where there looks like a repetition of the complement, or repetition of the subject. Usually mistakes will happen like that when a beginner is writing English. I wouldn't recommend, of course, to start with this. We assume that students who are studying with us have been doing a lot of English before that. But for a beginner trying to write an essay like that, a beginner should stick to simple sentences and then add compound sentences, simple sentences with a subject and a verb and an object, or a subject and a verb and a complement, and then compound sentences with but in the middle, using a subject verb before and a subject verb after, or things like and, nor, or, etc., making the compound sentences. We need to look this up. Or write complex sentences using structures like because, using a subject and verb before and subject and verb after, and we talked about this before. A beginner will only stick to these, first to simple sentences, then a variation of simple and compound, and then also variation of simple, compound, and complex. Then later on, the beginner will graduate to a higher level and start writing these kind of sentences we talked about today, like the participial phrases at the beginning of a simple sentence, or write appositives in the middle of a simple sentence, or a compound one, of course. We see these as varieties. A student who has been doing a lot of English can now deal with these things, and when reading text, the student can take the text and analyze it structurally. We analyze the text structurally about ideas. For example, we discovered that the first paragraph was simply an introduction and no thesis statement in the texts we read. Then the writer writes the statement of thesis in the second paragraph. Then I discover that there are something like 7 or 8 paragraphs dealing with the body of the subject, where the writer mentioned exactly 3 points. Each point took around 2 paragraphs. When the writer started a new point, the writer said furthermore, in addition, or something like this, transition. Then in the last paragraph, the writer stated the thesis, which was stated before somewhere at the beginning. Then the writer made a commentary. Now I'm analyzing the structure of the text on the level of ideas. Then there is something else the student can do. Take these articles that we use as samples in the book and in newspapers and analyze them on the level of sentences. We can do something that's really very formal, just the form of writing without content. The form of writing, I take one paragraph and then I look at it. How many sentences is this paragraph made up of? I will discover that every paragraph will be made up of something like 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, a number of sentences, but more than one. Because the paragraph is sentences, 2, 3, or more. And of course, on the level of the content, this paragraph has only one idea, or one sub-idea supporting the major idea. But let's talk about the paragraph as mere sentences without looking to meaning. I take every paragraph I read. I have an essay. I'm studying this essay as a sample, and I discover that every paragraph in this essay is made up, let's say, of a number of sentences. Then I divide that with slashes, for example. Then I take every single sentence in the paragraph. There are, for example, 6 or 7 sentences. I see that the writer used simple sentence, then another simple sentence, then a compound one, then a complex one, then a simple sentence. Now, why? I ask myself. I discover that most writers will use complex sentences or compound ones or longer ones, and then sometimes they write a very short sentence, a simple one, and this creates effect. The description goes on and on about disease, for example, in longer sentences, and then a very short one saying, he died. 2 words. He died does not need an object, because died, this verb is intransitive, it doesn't take an object. So he died is a sentence. Why does a writer, for example, in certain text, write very long sentences describing the disease and the final states of the disease, and then all of a sudden one sentence, he died? Because the writer wants to create an effect. So using simple sentences, compound ones, complex ones, is not haphazard. We use this for certain effect. Another thing, we analyze the essay, 2 sentences again, and we discover that there are compound, complex, simple, simple, compound, compound, complex, and so on. There is variation. What happens if all the sentences are complex? This does not make the style higher or better. This makes the style very complicated and boring. If all the sentences are complex, this is boring. If all the sentences are simple, this is very childlike and boring again. Very simple sentences all the time, like he went there, he saw the book, he took the book, he read the book. Now this is very simple. Simple sentences, correct, grammatical, but very boring, and they create a bad effect, not the effect I want to create. What if they are very long sentences? Again boring, and I lose interest, and maybe I'll not be able to concentrate. what do writers do then? Neither very simple sentences all the time, neither very complex sentences all the time. Writers use variety, variation, to create interest. And they use this variation in an intelligent way. But we start with this idea, there is variety. I say that a student now is analyzing an essay to just imitate these essays in writing. If my writing has many mistakes in grammar, let me focus on the grammatical issue of an essay. I look at the grammatical aspect. Now, once more, I took the whole essay and I divided this whole essay, or at least one paragraph, into sentences using slashes. So there are 7 sentences and 3 are complex, 2 are compound, and so on. Then I take every one single sentence here and study how it is made. I will discover that sometimes there are compound complex sentences. There is but and because in one sentence. So writers do that. There's compound complex sentences. And of course, it's done in an intelligent way, and we should try to imitate them. We see that these are grammatical sentences. Then we discover that there are doubly complex sentences. There's because and which in one sentence. Now the student is doing what? The student is using something like a red pen and an essay written on the computer, for example, and we make the lines larger and we separate the sentences, and then we are making some kind of dissecting the essay on the level of the sentence structure. I discovered this variety of essays and then of sentences in the essay. And then when I took sentences and studied every one of them, I saw that the structures of these sentences varied, and sometimes there is variety within the variety. There is compound, complex, and simple, and the complex ones sometimes are doubly complex, or there are compound and complex at the same time. There's but and because in the same sentence, or but and which in the same sentence. Now, I need to study more. Let me see how there are other varieties other than these. We'll discover something that we talked about today. Simple sentences, yes, but they were originally complex. For example, the ones we mentioned today. Realizing that music will soothe the baby, the mother played soft music or some soft music. Now, what type of sentence is this? It's simple, yes, but it is a bit longer than a simple sentence. It doesn't start with the subject. Sometimes we have simple sentences that do not start with the subject. The mother played some music. There is before this, realizing that music will soothe the baby. What is this? This is participial. So I know now another structure. The simple sentences could be a variety of them. Some of them are really simple in the real sense, not only in the sense of the number of verbs. They are very simple because they have one verb and they have this direct structure of subject, verb, then whatever completion there is. Some of them are not like that. Some of them have something a little bit higher, a style that's different, like a participial at the beginning, ing, ed, the ones we did before, did today. So here's another thing I discovered in the style of the writer, using a lot of participials in their structures, and we find this a lot in English. Then, is there anything else? Yes, see the positives we mentioned today. A simple sentence like the woman went downstairs. Then the woman, Mary Atkins. So the woman, Mary Atkins, this is a repetition of the woman, or the opposite. Okay, we say the mayor, Stevens. So the mayor is Stevens. Or a description of a person. The little boy, an adorable, cute little brat, or something like that, and then we talk about him. So this kind of structure is what? This is a structure in opposition to the noun. It's a nominal structure, an adjective and a noun, or simply a noun. Again, these are things that the student can discover by themselves when they look at essays to look for structures. When you study essays, we don't do the only thing that most readers do, which is looking up the meanings of words. This is not writing, and this is not English, this is not learning. We did 2 things. I talked about 2 things today. I take an essay as a sample, and I study this for content. How content? Not the meanings of words, the meaning of the whole text. This text, which is made up 20 paragraphs or so, has only one idea. The one I mentioned here in Al-Ahram Weekly, a very long text about the identity of Russia and what it is, what kind of conflict there is when Russia considers its own identity. So I studied the content and everything that has to do with the content, as we did before and as we are going to do again later. Then today, the last part of my lecture, I focused on how we study some essays, sometimes as simply structure. We'll not do this all the time. I started my lecture by talking about how we browse newspapers in order to know the general ideas that there are, and then we pick one subject or two that interest us, and then we read. We read for information, we read for knowledge, we read even for entertainment. But sometimes, as we study essay now and try to imitate writers, we'll do this kind of particular study of the structure of sentences. I said we find varieties, participials, appositives, and we'll find other things like writers, and we'll see this later in details and in a written format. Writers sometimes use repetitions. They don't repeat the same words, but they repeat the same structure. If you want to do this, if you want to be the best of people, if you want to do, then comma, and then the last part. We study this later as periodic style. But I want students to discover these things for themselves. I want students to say that we have learned something like 20 different structures other than simple, compound, and complex, and we learned these not from a book of structures or stylistic devices or grammar. We learn this by simply noticing what we read. A reader can just read to glean information, and a reader can read to imitate. We read for both, to get information and to imitate. So we will see what these structures are. I'll read the essay sometimes, one of the essay or two, as samples where I can learn the structures of sentences and how they are written. And while the student is doing that, the students teaching themselves lots and lots of things. I talked about many things that now I can add more. Other than the structures of these sentences, I will notice capitalization and all the points of punctuation. Usually students who come from an Arabic background, they read the structures of Arabic that depend on the case. In Arabic, we have something called case, which is al-i'rab. In Arabic, it's like Latin, we have the subject ending with a certain ending. Muhammadun, ragulun. We have this ending, which means this is the subject. Then we have another ending. When I say, Ra'aytu Muhammadan. Now, I know from the ending that this is the object. Arabic has a different kind of philosophy. Arabic is a case language. Arabic has these endings. And then Arabic has more. Arabic has connectors that we don't use as much in English, as when we link sentences with fa, fakana, fa'innahu, fa'inna. And then we use things like innama, inna al-hayata. Arabic has its own structure. I'm not teaching Arabic here, but I say when I come from an Arabic background, all these structures are in my head, and if I use them in English, things don't work. I read English now, I forget about the Arabic background, and I discover that punctuation in English has more importance than it does in Arabic. Arabic can be understood without punctuation because we have the case and we know where the subject is and where the object is, even if we write a very long structure without any punctuation. Many Arabic books are written with the unit of the paragraph. They have one long paragraph and then full stop, one long paragraph, full stop. In the middle of the paragraph there are many commas or whatever. We have sometimes nothing at all. In the very old books there was no kind of punctuation whatsoever. Coming from an Arabic background, we don't know the value of punctuation in English. In English, punctuation is a part of the grammar. So I need students to study this as punctuation, but also they notice that while they are reading text. Why do we have a comma here? Why do we have a semicolon here? Why is this exclamation mark? And so on and so forth. So we are learning now by analyzing the text formally, the form of the text. And of course, we did before analyze the content of the text. Thank you.